Ready? Ready. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Day, Deputy Executive Director of the California Building Standards Commission. With me in the room are CBSC Executive Director Stoyan Bumbalov, as well as Building Standards Commission Associate Construction Analyst Beth Maynard, and CBSC AGPA Barbara Tresley, who is our eye in the sky. She's running the meeting in the background. Also with us are representatives from the Division of the State Architect. Eric, did you want to say hi to everybody?
Hello, my name is Eric Drever, Principal Architect for DSA Headquarters, Architectural Codes and Policies. And joining me today is Alicia and Tal. I'll let you introduce yourselves.
Hello, I'm Alicia Chavez, Supervising Architect for the Sustainability Unit at DSA Headquarters.
Kevin Cummins, Senior Mechanical Engineer at DSA Headquarters.
All right, thank you. And also with us are representatives from both BSC and the Division of the State Architect and other agencies participating via Zoom. I'd like to welcome you to our California Plumbing Code Plumbing Fixture Workshop. Today is July 16th, 2025. And today's meeting is scheduled from 1 to 5 o'clock p.m. We may take a 10-minute break midway through as needed. Today's meeting is available via Zoom and teleconference as noted in the workshop notice and agenda. This meeting will also be live streamed on the CBSC YouTube channel. Please be aware the live stream has an approximate 45-second delay, and there's no method for offering verbal or written public comment. Closed captioning is available via Zoom's automated live transcriptions. To view closed captions in Zoom, click on the CC Live Transcript button. Closed captioning will automatically appear if you are watching via YouTube. I'll now read the Zoom and telephone instructions. To avoid feedback or other technical issues, please join the meeting through one device only. Comments will be taken from the public in Zoom with their hands raised, then from the public on the Zoom phone line. If you wish to make a comment on a specific agenda item, please listen for CBSC staff to ask for any comments from the public. At this time, please virtually raise your hand using the raise hand icon in Zoom. You will be recognized by the meeting's facilitator in the order that your hand was raised. At this time, please unmute yourself. When you are done speaking, please lower your hand and then mute yourself again. Please ensure that you have a working microphone on or attached to your device prior to raising your hand to make a comment. CBSC staff will continue through the queue until there are no hands raised remaining. Then we'll take comments from the public on the Zoom phone line, if there are any. Then at this time, you would unmute yourself, and when you're done speaking, mute yourself again. When the phone comments are complete, CBSC staff will then proceed to the next agenda item. Please speak slowly and clearly so that your comments can be transcribed accurately. And if you experience any technical difficulties, please call the CBSC main line at area code 916-263-0916, and someone can assist. Before we go further, does anyone have any questions regarding the Zoom and telephone instructions? In the room? I don't see any hands raised. Okay. All right, if there's no questions at this time, I'll provide some updates before we proceed with the agenda items. We wanted to provide a statement regarding the governor signing Assembly Bill 130, Chapter 22, Statutes of 2025, which enacts a 6-year moratorium on most residential state and local building standards. The statute also restricts the type of building standards that may be promulgated during an intervening code adoption cycle. CBSC is currently reviewing the enacted statute to determine its impact on our programs, policies, and laws, and will be providing guidance soon, likely in an information bulletin. In the meantime, this pre-cycle workshop will proceed as planned and will include the proposals BSC and DSA considered before the bill chaptered. However, much of what we discussed today will be substantive changes not allowed for consideration during an intervening cycle pursuant to the new AB 130 rules. However, we will continue to research these proposals in coordination with DSA and stakeholders, and will likely have future workshops to achieve a consensus-based solution that can be proposed for adoption during the 2027 triennial cycle. I'll go ahead and pause there if anyone has any comments or questions before we proceed. Seeing none in the room, no hands raised.
There are no hands raised. Nope.
Okay, great. Thanks, Barbara. All right, so now I will proceed to agenda item 2. Can I go ahead and share,
Oh.
Barbara?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, that's okay. We're going to proceed with a PowerPoint presentation that we posted on the Building Standards Commission website, along with the agenda when the meeting was noticed. So it's available there, but you can also follow along. I'm going to share my screen just in a moment. Go ahead.
Yeah.
You see that? Okay, great. Okay. So thanks again, everyone, for your interest in this workshop. Again, depending on how long this goes, we may take like a 10-minute break between 2:30 or 3 as needed. And once again, the chat feature is disabled in order to keep conversations with all meeting participants. We did want to take a moment for the members of the public and any other state agencies, if you wanted to introduce yourself and, just like a really brief, like 1 minute or less introduction and why you're interested in this workshop, this program. So I'll leave you some time to raise your hand if you'd like to introduce yourself. Okay. Bob?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Bob Raymer representing CBIA, Building Owners and Managers Association and the Apartment Association. And we recognize this has been an ongoing problem, I think, for decades, and would like to see it resolved. We understand the restrictions of AB 130, and if it can't be done in the intervening cycle, we certainly look forward to working with the commission on getting something for the next triennial. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bob. All right, Ellen Owens.
Yes, thank you. My name's Ellen Owens. I'm the Director of Design and Construction Services at the University of California Office of the President. And our campuses and medical centers have building officials who deal with this every day. So we surveyed them to get their feedback about Table 4.1 and related issues. And I'm here to just share those comments when it's appropriate. And we're interested in making things less complicated for the people who have to put the drawings together, and so that there's less back checks and everything's a little clearer. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen. And we really appreciate that you were able to poll those UC campuses and get us those comments and questions. So we look forward to discussing those a little bit later. Thank you so much. All right, Enrique, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Enrique Gonzalez. I am a Atmos co-development manager, and I also get phone calls for interpretation requests. And I do get a lot of questions on 4-1, which is the California section. However, I'm here to answer any questions and share the commentaries I get from the public when this comes up. Again, I'm here for any information. I'm looking forward to this meeting. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us, Enrique, and for all your help while we researched this topic. I know you've been a great asset in Beth's research and our own. We will discuss a little bit about the history of Table A and the IAPMO model plumbing code. So if you have any, you want to chime in at that point, absolutely, we appreciate it. So thank you. All right, any other hands raised,
There's no
Barbara?
hands and there's no phone participants.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much, everyone. I'm glad you were able to join us. Okay, so moving on. So one thing we want to talk about is that the Building Standards Commission and the Division of State Architects amendments to Title 24, including those in the plumbing code, are limited in scope, based on statutory authority. So I'll start with DSA structural safety. Eric, did you want to just briefly touch on what the scope of DSA's amendments?
Yeah, sure. As it relates to Part 5, DSA is the enforcement entity. We also have the authority to adopt regulations for California public schools and community colleges. We have other authorities outside of the context of this discussion, but I'll limit it to that.
Great, thanks, Eric. And then for the Building Standards Commission, when you see the BSC banner, next to a state amendment in the plumbing code, pursuant to Chapter 1 of that code, the Building Standards Commission has authority for state-owned buildings, University of California and California State University buildings. And then also, we have a BSCCG banner for Calgreen that doesn't really apply in this situation. So for the most part, what we're going to be talking about today is amendments made under the BSC banner for state buildings, UC and CSU buildings. Okay. Moving on. This is just a couple sections of building standards law that we wanted to touch on. Health and Safety Code section 18916 defines model code. And as you can see here, we've kind of excerpted a couple examples. The Building Standards Commission and the other proposing adopting agencies are required to adopt specific model codes by standards development organizations like the International Code Council, ICC, and also the International Association of Plumbing and Mechanical Officials, IAPMO, who we heard from before with Enrique. We just wanted to kind of highlight that because we will be discussing the aspects of these model codes as they relate to the amendments in Chapter 4 of the Plumbing Code that we'll touch on. Okay. All right, and this section, specifically California Plumbing Code section 422.1 is where we find the text which indicates and again, this is model code text that IAPMO develops in the Uniform Plumbing Code that California adopts. So that this text indicates for all occupancies it points to the California Building Code for determining the occupant load factor. So without California amendments, the italicized language you see here, that is the direction in the Uniform Plumbing Code, that model code. And we'll talk a little bit about the state amendments in just a moment. And then here we have table 422.1, minimum plumbing facilities. Again, this is model Uniform Plumbing Code language with some state amendments. Table 422.1, just beneath the title is where the text indicates BSC and DSA occupancies are directed to go either to the California Building Code or Table 4-1 to determine occupant load. That's a state amendment that BSC and DSA co-adopted a few cycles back. Also, a state amendment that we've listed here is Note 8 under the table. It's footnote 8. And you'll notice that this footnote was co-adopted by several state agencies quite a number of years back. The Building Standards Commission, the Division of the State Architect, the Department of Housing and Community Development, and the Office of Statewide Hospital Planning and Development has a footnote that says, in accordance with sections 1.8.7 and 301.3 of the Plumbing Code, the authority having jurisdiction may approve alternative design criteria when determining the minimum number of plumbing fixtures. So that is a footnote that these agencies co-adopted several years back. And then all other occupancies would refer to the California Building Code, Chapter 10, Table 1004.5 in most cases. So here we have an excerpt of Table 4-1. This is the BSC and DSA co-adopted table that's been in the Plumbing Code for the past few cycles. This has remained static since agency adoption or this table previously was called Table A, had remained static since its adoption from 2006 until 2019. In that 2019 intervening code cycle, BSC and DSA held a similar workshop. This is when we revised and renamed Table A to Table 4-1. And we're going to get into a little bit of the history there a little bit later in the presentation, but we just wanted to share this with you now. So now what we wanted to do is list a few options that we'd like to consider for discussion during this workshop. Basically, we're going to talk about these options, the pros and the cons. We'll take each one in part, and then we're going to take a step back and look at some of the history, of how we got here. And then Beth had worked with DSA and other folks to come up with some different scenarios for different building types and the plumbing calculations. So that's kind of the order of operations we're gonna take. Before we go through these options, I just wanted to check in and see if anyone had any comments or questions on anything thus far. Seeing, hearing none? No.
You hit the hide button for your sharing.
Oh yeah, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Barbara. Okay, so there's technically 5 options, but we've got them numbered here. So the first option we're going to look at that has been suggested to kind of address this issue is delete Table 4-1 from the California Plumbing Code, the co-adopted BSC and DSA state amendment that's pretty much been in there since I think 2009. So we'll talk about the pros and cons of that option. The second option we've broken out into 2. It would be to further amend Table 4-1. And the first option, 2A, would be to remove functions of space that don't align with the DSA and BSA authorities, which are K-12 schools, community colleges for DSA, and then state buildings, UC and CSU buildings for BSC. That's something we've gotten comments on from the regulated community. The second way we could consider amending Table 4-1 is revising square footage assigned to more closely align with the California Building Code, IBC, Table 1004.5, which the UPC points to, and also IBC Table 2902.1. The third option we'll look at is adopting International Building Code Table 2902.1 instead of Uniform Plumbing Code Table 422.1 for plumbing fixture counts to be used with IBC Table 1004.5. And lastly, another option that's been considered is to insert International Building Code Table 2902.1 from the IBC into the California Plumbing Code Chapter 4 for BSC and DSA occupancies only. So it would be a similar state amended table, just one that ICC uses in Chapter 29 of the Building Code. So first option, deleting Table 4-1 from the California Plumbing Code. This was proposed at the workshop that BSC and DSA co-facilitated back during the 2019 intervening cycle. And we heard from stakeholders then that, that would pretty much, bring us in line with the intent of the model codes that we're required to adopt. Again, the UPC says, determine occupant load factor by, using the building code, Table 1004.5. And then use that to calculate your plumbing fixture counts pursuant to Table 422.1. So some of the benefits or the pros to deleting Table 4-1, it could decrease confusion for the regulated community with regard to the scope of the state amendments. There would be a little bit more consistency in applying Chapter 10 of the California Building Code for occupant load calculations for all occupancies. And of course, there'd be fewer state amendments in the California Plumbing Code. Some of the cons of deleting this would be, it could yield higher plumbing fixture counts for certain occupancies within BSC and DSA's authority. And then you'll see this as kind of a recurring theme throughout the workshop. this type of a code change would likely incur an economic and fiscal impact or Form 399 that BSC and DSA would have to complete to highlight the costs impact to the regulated community. So I'll go and pause there and see if anyone has any comments or questions on deleting table 4-1 from the California Plumbing Code. Before I go to Lynn, again, I wanted to thank Ellen Owens for polling the UC campuses. I think they had some good comments here, but Lynn, go ahead, please.
Yeah, hi, I didn't introduce myself. My window is behind me, so I'm actually going to turn my camera off. I am a supervising architect with Real Estate Services Division. DGS is quite well represented at your table there, so I didn't think I needed to represent myself, but I actually find this table 4-1 very important for the state. It's very similar to table 29A back, I don't know, 100 years ago, the beginning of my career. And I'm going to give you an example of a warehouse that I had. It was a private sector project at the time, but we do work for not just DGS owned, but we do projects across the state. We have a couple warehouses right now for Porterville Developmental Center. And a storage warehouse facility is the biggest impact in my professional experience where this comes into play. In the private sector, I did a 600,000 square foot warehouse. If I used table 1004 out of the CBC or the 2901, I'm sorry, I don't really know the number of that one. Either one, I would have 1,200 occupants for a primarily storage use space. I'd have 600 females, I'd have 600 males. I would be required to have 5 water closets female, 4 water closets male, 3 labs each, male and female, and 4 drinking fountains. However, if I can use this table 4-1, I have 150 occupants, which is much more realistic to a storage warehouse, not a distribution center, but a storage warehouse. I've got 75 female, 75 male. I need 1 water closet each, 1 lab each, and 1 drinking fountain each. That is substantial in cost to a state project. We're going from 9 total water closets, 6 total labs, and 3 drinking fountains to 2 water closets, 2 labs, and 1 drinking fountain. That's a substantial expense for a use that has, high pile storage. So I do have concerns with removing 4-1 from use. Wherever you put it, I think that the egress numbers out of the CBC are very high when it comes to plumbing fixture count. I think they have historically been very high. And back in the day, the 29A, table 29A was very similar to this and quite helpful for that. That's all I have to say.
Great. Thank you so much for your feedback and comments, Lynn. We appreciate it. And thank you for joining us today. We're glad we have a RESD representative with us. We appreciate it. Okay. All right. Ellen, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to mention that some of our building officials mentioned a similar thing, that just eliminating 4.1 would result in higher fixture counts in a number of different occupancies. So I guess I wanted to ask you all up at the table there if you could note which of these certain occupancies you think would be most impacted. Just a little more information than what's on the slide, if you have that at hand.
Yeah, I don't know if the scenarios that we're going to look at later.
We have them all.
We do? Okay.
We have all of them.
We do have some, and they're in the PowerPoint that we posted. Ellen, we're going to get to those a little bit later and maybe look at them piecemeal. But yeah, I know warehouses, I think, are one of the key ones that we're probably going to continue to hear about. But yeah, thank you for your comments and feedback. We appreciate it. Vicky?
Yes, hello, my name is Vicky Salgado. I'm with IA Interior Architects. And we work primarily with private clients, and so we're sort of already dealing with your potential con if you were to remove table 4-1. When table A was still in the code, a lot of the local jurisdictions adopted that for the occupant load for plumbing. And when that went away, a lot of them did not adopt table 4-1, so we resorted back to just using chapter 10. But what's happening is that most of the existing buildings that we're working in cannot meet the current code requirements with the fixtures that they have. So our clients are faced with adding multiple fixtures, particularly for B occupancy is one of the biggest issues. And so there are some jurisdictions that have adopted table 4-1, and we're feeling very lucky when we get one of those, because we feel that if we just go by chapter 10, we end up with a lot more fixtures than we actually need, primarily because cities are much more stringent about the occupant load factors when we're talking about egress. And so if we have to use those same factors for plumbing, we end up with just an inordinate amount of extra fixtures that the building either can't accommodate, or they're not really warranted by the way the space will actually be used.
Understood. Thank you so much, Vicky. Okay. Any other?
No other hands and no phone.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. So moving on, so we got some good comments there on deleting table 4-1. So we'll move on to the next option. 2A, which would be removing functions of space that don't align with the Building Standards Commission and the Division of the State Architect scope or authorities that cover table 4-1. Some of the pros we identified, again, less confusion for the regulated community, consistency in applying chapter 10 of the CBC for occupant load calculations for all occupancies, when adopted by local jurisdiction, fewer state amendments in the plumbing code. And then some of the cons would be kind of like Vicky just stated, local jurisdictions that adopt and amend table 4-1 to be applicable to all occupancies, would need to kind of explicitly expand the scope in their local ordinances. Again, just we've gotten calls and emails about this where, like Eric and I said at the beginning, the intent of the amendments and of table 4-1 is to apply to BSC occupancies, state buildings, state colleges, universities, or K-12 public schools and community colleges for DSA. And when you look at some of the occupancy types or the functions of space in there, I can't think of any. What are some of the weird ones, like chapels and some of them just don't lend themselves to a UC, CSU, state building campus, a school campus. So that we've just gotten some questions about that. I don't know if there's any comments, questions, or concerns about this option. This is one of the things that we might take into account, if instead we keep table 4-1 and then just further amend it to kind of clarify it. We'd be happy to hear that. And I see Lynn's hand up.
Sorry, you might see my hand up a bunch today.
Absolutely.
I did fix my background a little bit. So I would be mindful that Real Estate Services Division DGS is responsible for contracting for all state agencies that aren't in the group of the Big Seven. So, and even those in the Big Seven have to come to us when they're outside of their authority. And so when thinking about what kind of buildings that don't lend themselves to Building Standards Commission, be mindful of the breadth of campuses and uses that DGS has to deal with, because we do fall under Building Standards Commission, and we deal with prison institutions that would have chapels on them. We deal with, I don't even want to begin to list. It's about everything you can imagine. So I would be concerned if we started cherry picking and throwing out uses, because I do think DGS, RESD at least, does have our fingers on all kinds of different uses. Thanks.
No, that's great. Thank you for your comments on that, Lynn. We appreciate it, and that's a good point. So, and Lynn, we might circle back with you offline after this, just to coordinate a little bit further, because we might have some questions for you, if that's okay.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you so much. Any other comments on this topic? Again, we're talking about, possibly looking at and removing functions of space that, that may not align with BSC and DSA scope. Enrique?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. Thanks, Enrique.
Yeah, I'd just like to share, a lot of the calls I get are either a local official or an architect that are not in agreement to the outcome, or some jurisdictions feel, wow, we don't want to go with table 4-1 because for the most part it's going to give us less fixtures. However, it's an option for a couple of times, and it's up to the local jurisdiction. So I see how the local jurisdictions are kind of torn to make the decision. Should I let them have more fixtures or have less fixtures if they go with 4-1? And they're kind of, that's a big issue. What happens with 4-1 most of the times when I get the calls, and whether it's allowed, and ultimately it's up to the local jurisdiction to either allow it, but it's always in very different applications, occupancy types. And so sometimes they lean towards it, sometimes they lean away from it, and they kind of look at the situation, the application, the occupancy type, and they kind of bring it all together to make that decision. But that's kind of where I see the tough part of it. And just wanted to share that with you.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Enrique. Any other hands raised on that?
And there's no phone still.
Okay. Thanks, Barbara. Okay, so we're going to move along. The next option that we are exploring is 2B, revise table 4-1 occupant load factor to more closely align with, CBC, IBC tables 1004.5 and 2902.1. So we know that the Uniform Plumbing Code, the model code language, directs the code user to determine occupant load factor by using the building code, which would be table 1004.5, ingress and egress, to get that occupant load factor. So this is actually the path that the Building Standards Commission and DSA took back in 2019 when they revised table A and then renamed it table 4-1. The concept being that, this is something that's come up quite a bit in our discussions, is while we understand, preserving what was originally in the model code, as table A several years ago, and we'll talk about the history a little bit later, to yield a reasonable number of plumbing fixtures for certain occupancy types. Why would there, the question is, why would state buildings, state colleges, universities, and schools and community colleges be allowed to have, or be allowed to use a table that yields, fewer plumbing fixtures for certain occupancies, but then the rest of the model code that applies to all the other buildings does not, that kind of discrepancy. So that's why we've, one of the activities that we did several years ago was run a bunch of calculations and figure out where the disparities were between if you did use what used to be called table A, now it's table 4-1, versus if you use table 1004.5. The gap was pretty wide. So I think back then BSC and DSA tried to kind of close that gap a little bit and lessen that disparity a little bit. So that's kind of, I think, what we're talking about with this option. Again, the pros would be results are more aligned in the number of required fixtures between calculations using table 1004.5 and table 4-1. Again, the cons could result in an increase in plumbing fixture units, and as a state regulation, this would likely incur an economic and fiscal impact in the BSC and DSA rulemakings. So I'll pause there to see if anyone has any comments or questions on this possible option. Enrique, I see your hands up. Did you want to comment on this one too?
No, my mistake. I never put it down.
Oh, sorry, no
Apologize.
worries. Thank you. Oh, Lynn, go ahead, please.
I just don't want to leave it uncommented on. My
Mhm.
comments would be the same for this as they were for the last, because again, it would be a huge fiscal impact, keeping in mind too that, and I can't put my finger on it in the code right this second, but if we change uses, would we have to comply with all code requirements? So if we change the use in one of our existing buildings, as was mentioned previously, are we now going to have to comply with the egress occupant loads for plumbing fixtures and have to add them to our existing buildings just to comply with a use change?
Understood. Thank you for your question, Lynn. All right, any other comments or questions on this option? Gary?
Hi, I work with UCLA, and I have seen that it definitely would increase in the fixture units. And from what we have seen over here is that all the buildings are existing and increasing. There is no space to add more fixtures when we go to table 1004.5 instead of table 401.
Thank you, Gary. That is a comment that we've received contacts on from the regulated community as well, with regard to existing buildings. So that's definitely something that we're considering. So thank you for your comment. Okay,
No other
no
hand.
more hands raised. Okay. So I'm going to move on to the next one. So option 3, we would consider adopting the International Building Code Table 2902.1 instead of Uniform Plumbing Code Table 422.1 for plumbing fixture counts to be used in conjunction with IBC Table 1004.5. So once again, pros would be a more consistent occupant load factor determined when using Table 1004.5. And then occupant load factor and plumbing fixture count tables would be coming from the same model code. Currently, you have to jump from the plumbing code to the building code back to the plumbing code for making that calculation. The cons for this option, you would have to go to the building code for plumbing fixture counts, which currently is not the requirement in California. And we'll touch on this a little bit later, but just as a reminder, because California adopts the Uniform Plumbing Code by IAPMO, we have a placeholder in Chapter 29 of the International Building Code, which becomes the California Building Code, that chapter is not adopted. So, there's definitely some, kind of quirks to this option there that, we'd have to consider, but, just kind of full disclosure. Another con would possibly result in a different number of fixture counts. And again, this would incur the economic and fiscal impact in the rulemaking BSC and DSA would conduct. So I'll pause there and see if anyone has any comments or questions on this option, adopting IBC Table 2902.1 instead of Table 422.1 for plumbing fixture counts. Vicky?
Hi, yes, I would be in favor of this. It seems like a more realistic number of plumbing fixtures. And again, I'm speaking primarily for the private sector and B occupancy. In the current plumbing code, particularly for women's water closets, the number of fixtures jumps up exponentially when you reach a certain occupant level, like 100 occupants is 4 fixtures and 101 occupants jumps up to 8 fixtures. So it's a huge difference. So we would be in favor of having something that isn't quite as extreme. I think I did a calculation. If I had 200 women under the current CBC, I would need 8 fixtures, and under the IBC, I would only need 5.
Understood. Yeah, thank you for your comments, Vicky. And I see Enrique.
Hello, everyone. I want to add to this one because it's important to know a little bit of the history of table 422.1. 422.1 used to be a little closer to what the building code has, similar ratios for separate facilities, male and female. However, IAMO did a big study using the potty parity queuing theory, which addresses really big concerns in large occupants, amusement parks, where you see a lot of restaurant lines where the women are out the door, the men are going in and out. That's a big potty parity study. There's a lot of documents and articles on that parity, which is why the UPC table 422.1 was updated based on that research. It's a little separate from the fact where you still need your occupancy load. That's one factor. Occupancy load is what 4-1 is. The California code says go to the building code, get your occupancy load based on egress. That's option 1. You get your occupancy load. Or if the occupancy type falls under 4-1, then that's the other option. However, sometimes that volume of the occupancy load is smaller. So automatically when you go to the table, you're going to have less fixtures. And I want to share one more thing as far as the building code minimum fixtures versus 422.1 minimum fixtures. There's also studies out there that compare both of them. And they're kind of, some have more fixtures depending on the occupancy number and type. So it's kind of balances out. It's not 100%. 422.1 has more, not 100%. The building code has more. It really depends on the load and the type. And so it's right, you have to fix with the ratio, work with the ratio. But I wanted to just point out the distinction of 4-1 is about the load. California, egress is about the load. And then the two tables, I wanted to point out that the UPC 422.1 for maximum minimum fixture counts is based on the queuing theory, the potty parity study. So just want to share that.
Understood. Thank you so much for that background, Enrique. We really appreciate it. All right. Any other comments or questions about option 3? Okay, seeing none. All right, we'll move on. All right, so option 4, kind of similar, would be to insert table 2902.1, basically copy and paste it from the IBC to California Plumbing Code Chapter 4 for BSC and DSA occupancy. So it would basically be a state amendment similar to table 4-1 that would replace it, and instead kind of use that table instead. Some of the pros identified would be that the occupant load factor and the plumbing fixture count tables, again, would come from the same model code. Table 2902.1 and 1004.5, both come from the IBC. But the cons would be it could cause confusion with the regulated community, and again, incur an economic and fiscal impact statement for the agencies. So again, this would be, instead of adopting it in the building code, it would remain, Chapter 29 would still have the placeholder that says not adopted by California, but BSC and DSA could take the language from table 2902.1 and basically replace table 4-1 with that language. Just want to see if there's any comments or questions about that option from the folks in the room. Seeing none?
No.
Okay. And we'll come back to a lot of these later if somebody thinks of something or wants to jump in. Okay, so now we've kind of talked about some of the options that BSC and DSA are considering. So we appreciate everyone's comments. We're going to kind of, touch on some of the history of kind of how we got here now, just, for context before we start looking at some of the scenarios that we've come up with for some of the calculations. And Enrique Gonzalez with IATMO kind of covered a lot of this, but just for some context, the 2006 Uniform Plumbing Code had what was previously called Table A for occupant load factor included. It was a model code table. And then into the 2007 California Plumbing Code, which adopted the 2006 UPC, that code adopted Table A and Table 4-1, which later became 422.1 for fixture counts. And during the 2007 intervening cycle, they made some changes to the language for occupant load factor. And that's when they pointed to, for occupant load factor, use, UPC Table A. So it was kind of all contained in the plumbing code back then. So jumping ahead 3 years, in 2009, Table A was removed from the Uniform Plumbing Code. And in 2010, for the 2010 California Plumbing Code, this predates pretty much everyone that's currently on staff, but basically BSC and DSA kind of adopted Table A, even though it had been removed from the UPC, and that's when it first became a state amendment in Title 24 in the Plumbing Code. And they preserved the name, they kept it as Table A. As far as the charging language, BSC and DSA kind of kept that previous model code language that was in the 2006 UPC, which said total occupant load shall be determined in accordance with occupant load factor Table A. We just attached the BSC and DSA banners to let the regulated community know that this was now a state amendment. It was not model code. And I think there was some confusion when this happened because formatting wise, we've looked back, Beth did a lot of research, and it wasn't italicized as it should have been. I think we didn't fix that until later. So it still looked, like it was model code language, but it did have the banners next to the charging language. And I believe it had the X's in the matrix adoption table. So one could surmise it was a state amendment, but we didn't quite get the formatting right. So, and then just some background on some of the rationale that was used by, the state back then in the initial statement of reasons. And I think this was from DSA's ISOR. The proposal to, basically add or preserve Table A occupant load factors being made by the proposing state agencies, including DSA, because, due to IATMO removing the table from the 2009 edition of the UPC, the state agencies believe this table is necessary and important in assisting the citizens of California to accurately estimate the appropriate number of plumbing fixtures for occupancies based on the occupant load factor instead of requirements specified by the 2009 edition of the UPC. So, back then, stakeholders were concerned about the removal of Table A. So BSC and DSA responded by kind of putting it back in there, but as a state amendment, so that's kind of when it started. Just moving ahead a little bit, in 2012, the Uniform Plumbing Code, IATMO added language in section 422.1. This was where they, indicated, to determine occupant load factor would be in accordance with the building code, which is still in there today. And then again, BSC and DSA amended that section to, at that point, instead of point to the building code, it was just amended to just point to occupant load factor Table A. So back then we struck the reference to the building code, and again, that was kind of confusing too, because technically it's a state amendment made by BSC and DSA, but it was, it was kind of limiting what, the rest of the code would apply to. So we didn't really get it right at that point. We were, each time we update these amendments, we have to update the charging language and the note under, table 422.1 the total occupant load shall be determined in accordance with occupant load factor table A. So those are changes that we made in the 2012 triennial cycle for the 2013 code, and those remained for some time. And then fast forward to both the 2015 and the 2018 UPC, there were no changes, so it kind of remained static. And BSC and DSA continued to carry forward table A and our amendments, our co-adopted amendments in table 422.1 without anything new. And during this time, this is when we started getting a lot of calls about the confusion about why we had removed the pointer to the building code, I think. And then, so again, fast forward to the 2019 intervening cycle when we had a similar workshop, BSC and DSA renamed table A to table 4-1 just to kind of align more with the Uniform Plumbing Code's numbering sequence at that point. And then we amended the charging language in 422.1 fixture count. And this is where we said the total occupant load and occupancy classification shall be determined in accordance with the California Building Code, which is, what the model code states. We previously had or occupant load factor table A. So in the prior cycle, we realized that we weren't supposed to just cut out the building code. So that's where it first truly became an option, where, like Enrique was saying, you could either use table 1004.5 ingress egress for determining your occupant load factor, or if your functions of space, align with table 4-1, you could use that as an alternative. And that's where BSC and DSA, instead of trying to do this in the charging language, made it more of an exception. Using occupancy classification described as a function of space, determine occupant load factor from table 4-1 of this chapter. And I think BSC and DSA were like one cycle off, but eventually it was harmonized, and that's what's currently in the California Plumbing Code. So once again, in the 2019 intervening cycle, some specific changes that DSA and BSA made to table 4-1. We replaced occupancy with function of space. I think, again, the intent of this was to more closely align with CBC table 1004.5. Many of the occupant load factors, the square footages, were updated or changed based on comments we received from stakeholders and calculations that we ran on different scenarios. It was identified that using CBC table 1004.5, sometimes generated disproportionate increases in fixture requirements for some uses. This was how CPC alternate table A was seen to provide equitable occupant load figures for the majority of the functional uses. And back then, table 4-1 was intended to improve upon table A and remains an alternative to CBC table 1004.5 in providing proportionate occupant load figures used to determine plumbing fixture count minimums. Once again, like Enrique said. So some issues with California Building Code table 1004.5 occupant load, as many folks have already said, this table is primarily used for egress occupant load. So it doesn't necessarily line up with determining plumbing fixture counts for all occupancies and functions of space. Incomplete listing of functions that will necessitate plumbing fixtures. And then listing of functions that have no bearing on plumbing fixture use. Consideration has been given to the nature of the actual use for the functions. This was some research that was done back in the 2019 intervening cycle activity, particularly transient functions versus destination functions, which bears directly on plumbing facility use. As an example, a business staff member may use a parking structure, transient, to gain access to a lobby and corridor, transient, to gain access to an office, destination. That staff member can only occupy one of those places at a time and requires the use of parking and lobby or corridor to reach the destination function of office. So the staff member should contribute to plumbing fixture loads only from the standpoint of the primary use office. In this slide, a number of categories of CBC table 1004.5. In those cases, they would yield excessive occupant load values, hence the notion to retain the availability of then table A, which was later changed to table 4-1 as an alternate method. So I'll kind of pause there and see if anyone has any questions or comments before we move on? Lynn, go ahead.
Yeah, prior to 2019, the office use, business use was, and if you looked at the companion books that went with understanding the IBC, business use was calculated for the actual destination, like you just described. So it would be the office space, but not restrooms, not wall thickness, not circulation spaces, corridors, and so forth. When they changed in 2019 to the gross floor area, all of those other spaces are now calculated for egress. And believe me, I've run into this with the state fire marshal many times. So we've got to calculate, wall thickness as business use occupant load area. So it seems like if there's an appetite to go in this direction, I think some methodology like you're just describing should be considered because and really revisit table 1004.5 for those nuanced calculations, because there's a lot of space that wouldn't actually be destination. Restrooms, corridors, shafts with an opening on that floor, stairs, and so forth. Thanks.
Understood. Thank you so much, Lynn. Was there? Oh, okay. Enrique, go ahead.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I just want to, I guess, elaborate a little bit on what Len said also, because that's another thing that I tried studying when I saw the concern about table 4-1, which is kind of harmonizing with the building code version of it in 1004.5. However, the 1004.5, as Lynn was indicating, is based off on two scenarios, which is gross or net. And that's kind of where I don't see it in California. And I just want to point that out for clarity, that the IBC version of it has two types. It's either net or gross. Where in the California version, 4-1, is just an occupancy load factor.
Yeah, thank you, Enrique. And I know we've talked about this with DSA, and I do have some notes from when we discussed this in 2019. Floor area gross is area measured within the perimeter formed by the inside surface of the exterior walls, the area of all occupiable and non-occupiable spaces, including mechanical and elevator shafts, toilet rooms, closets, and mechanical equipment rooms, are included in the gross floor area. This area could also include any covered porches, carports, or other exterior space intended to be used as part of the building's occupiable space. Floor area net is an area intended to include only the room areas that are used for specific occupancy purposes and does not include circulation areas such as corridors, ramps, stairways, service and utility spaces, such as toilet rooms, mechanical and electrical equipment rooms. Net floor area is typically measured between inside faces walls within a room. The use of net and gross floor areas is intended to provide a refinement in the occupant load determination. The gross floor area technique applied to a building only allows in the deduction of exterior walls, vent shafts, and interior ports from the planned area of the building. The next floor area permits the exclusion of certain spaces that would be included in the gross floor area. The net floor area is intended to apply to the actual occupied floor areas. The area used for permanent building components, such as shafts, fixed equipment, thickness of walls, corridors, stairways, toilet rooms, mechanical rooms, and closets, is not included in the net floor area. So kind of like Lynn was saying, and you reiterated, Enrique, that's something that CBC Table 1004.5 takes into account. And it's something that we can certainly, consider when revising Table 4-1. So thank you again for your comments. Any other comments or questions on that before we move on? Okay. And how are we doing on time? Everybody doing okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So We talked about some of the different scenarios that we calculated. I'm going to turn it over to my counterpart, Beth Maynard, Associate Construction Analyst. She worked really hard with DSA and other BSC staff and stakeholders to kind of come up with some calculations. And I think we've got a bunch that we'd like to look at. Some of these might touch on what Ellen Owens was asking about earlier. And Beth, I'll defer to your notes and stuff. So we can go as far into the weeds as you want and see
Okay.
what folks say. So
Okay,
yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
okay. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. This table, our first table here is the assembly occupancy. And what I did was I calculated out for conference and then added dining. So when you see the parentheses there in the table, you'll notice that the parentheses is when we added for the dining. So this table compares the CPC, California Plumbing Code tables 4.1 and 422.1 in the first column. And if you start calculating instead of the first column, the second column. And then table 1004 from the California Building Code with table 422.1 is in the third column. And in the fourth column, we have table 10004.5 and table 2902.1. So all of them, all these tables that I'm going through are all going to be set up like that. So when I talk about them, just note that that second column is table 4.1 and so on. So in the 1,000 square foot using table 4.1, the occupant load was 34. And in the second I gotta reword this because I had everything written wrong. And then in the third and fourth columns, the occupant load is 67. So right there, the occupant load is less for using table 4.1. And so water closets, one each for male and female for table A. And the last column, I need to do this better, Kevin. I'm just a little.
Okay.
So let's go to the 8,000 square foot because in the first row, there's not much difference, except in the middle column there, you see water closets for 2 females. And so in the 8,000 row, you see the difference in the table 10004 in the third column there with 422.1. There seems to be an increase in water closets from both the second column and the fourth column. And then in the 20,000, you'll notice that there's somewhat of a difference, especially in the middle column there for the women's water closets being 11. Also in the last fourth column, your water closets are 11 also. And in that 20,000 occupant load for the table 4.1, the occupant load was 667. And then using the third and fourth columns, your occupant load was 1,333. So in doing all of these, all of the occupant loads for using table 1 were pretty much half the size of what the other 2 occupant loads were using table 10-4.5 or
10.4.5.
yeah, 1004.5. Oh, so next we're going to go to assembly with fixed seating, which my notes are better.
Okay.
And this was again used assembly with fixed seats for function of space for all 3 columns to determine occupant load for the required number of plumbing fixture units. So the first column there and first row is 50 seats. And column 2 using table 4-1, the occupant load was 25. And see, table 4-1 uses 50% of each of the seating values. The third and fourth columns using the CBC table 10004.5, the occupant load was 50. CPC table 422.1 note 3 states the total number of required water closets for female shall not be less than the total number of required water closets and urinals for males. BSC amendment for BSC occupancies, this requirement shall not apply when single occupancy toilet facilities are provided for each sex and an A or E occupancy with an occupant load of less than 50. Either A, the required urinal shall be permitted to be omitted, or B, if installed, the urinal shall not require a second water closet to be provided for the female. So urinals can be omitted per CPC table 422.1 note 3A for BSC regulated occupancies. So continuing on with your 500 seats, column 2 using CPC table 4.1, your occupant load was 250. And then the third and fourth columns, occupant load was 500. And the occupant load values for assembly with fixed seating is significantly different between the CPC table 1004.5 and the CPC table 4.1. Table 1004.5 calculations result in 100% increase in occupant load. As the facility becomes larger, the difference in the required number of plumbing fixtures become greater. So the elimination of table 4.1 will increase requirements for BSC occupancies. Amendment to match table 1004.5 will increase requirements, but the amendment itself is easy. So for the next one, we've business occupancy. So using the business as function of space in the California Plumbing Code Table 4-1 and the CBC Table 1004.5 to determine the occupant load for the required number of plumbing fixture units. So the row 3,750, your occupant load for all three columns in this one is 25 person occupant load. And so what I have noted is that the footnote to table 4.1 complicates the issue, using it may yield a different occupant load even for the same size building. So the footnote states accessory areas such as, but not limited to, hallways, corridors, stairways, ramps, toilet rooms, mechanical rooms, closet, and fixed equipment may be excluded. So that's that same situation that you were just referring to in the couple previous slides. So CPC section 422.2, separate facilities exception 3 is used in the second and third columns. And it states, in business and mercantile occupancies with total occupant load of 50 or less, including customers and employees, one toilet facility designed for use by no more than one person at a time shall be permitted by both sexes. And then in the fourth column, the IBC section 2902.2, exception 4, separate toilet facilities are not required with an occupant load of less than 25. So all three of those methods result in the same numbers. I don't know how much detail do you want me to get into each of the details in this, or should I just kind of summarize?
I think we can summarize and then, for folks on Zoom, if you have any comments or questions as we go through these scenarios, feel free to raise your hand and we can, kind of stop and address them
Okay,
as we go through. So, but I think, just summarizing.
just summarizing this. Okay.
Did you want to jump to the next one?
Yeah, let's go ahead and jump to the next one. So continue, we'll just bypass this as the business. So for the summary, there's no difference between occupant load values in the CBC table 1004.5 and CPC table 4.1. As a result, the required number of plumbing fixtures calculated per table 422.1 is the same while using the California Building Code table 1004.5 or CPC table 4-1. However, for the same number of plumbing occupants, the required number of plumbing fixtures differs if IBC chapter 29 is used in calculations. Occupant load calculations are the same. So table 4.1 and CPC and chapter 10 and CPC results in the same numbers. I did say, is that very good? Required number of plumbing fixtures is within one or two fixtures using the California Plumbing Code use versus the in the National Building Code, Chapter 29. All right. Education beyond the 12th grade. Using education beyond the 12th grade as a function of space in the CPC Table 4.1 and education classroom area CBC Table 10004.5 to determine the occupant load for the required number of plumbing fixture units, which we use B occupancy to get the numbers from the Plumbing Code Table 422.1 and California Building Code Table 2902.1. So the occupant load value for educational occupancy above the 12th grade is significantly different between CBC Table 10004.5 and the CPC Table 4-1. Table 10004.5 calculations result in 150 increase in occupant load. As the facility becomes larger, the differences in the required number of plumbing fixtures will become greater. Calculations for the required number of plumbing fixtures for educational occupancy per IBC Table 2902.1 are significantly different from the one in Plumbing Code Table 422.1. Yeah. And the next one, using the education beyond the 12th grade as a function of space for shops and vocational in the California Plumbing Code Table 4.1 and the California Building Code Table 10004.5 to determine the occupant load for the required number of plumbing fixtures. We use, again, the B occupancy. So the occupant load value of educational occupancies for shops and vocational use is the same in the tables 10004.5 and Table 4.1. California Plumbing Code Table 4.1 is unclear about the type of occupancy for shops and other vocational areas in educational facilities. If business occupancy, 150 square foot per occupant in Table 4.1 is applied to the shop's vocational use, the difference in the required number of plumbing fixtures will be significantly greater. Calculations for the required number of plumbing fixtures for educational occupancy per IBC Table 2902.1 are significantly different from the one per California Plumbing Code Table 422.1. Exercise. So occupant load calculations using different methods result essentially in the same number. So the 5,000 square foot exercise room using an A3 occupancy has an occupant load of 100 for all three columns. Occupant load calculations using different methods result in almost the same numbers. So the occupant load calculations using different methods result in the same numbers. So final summary on that. Next, we'll go on to the kitchen. Using kitchen as a function of space. And comparing, so let me go to the summary. The occupant load factor in the California Building Table 10004.5 for commercial kitchens is 4 times greater than the one in the CPC Table 4-1. As a facility becomes larger, the difference in the required number of plumbing fixtures will become significantly greater. Additionally, the CPC Table 422.1 is not specific about commercial kitchens. Moving on to laboratory. So non-educational laboratory occupant load values are the same between the Plumbing Code Table 4.1 and the CBC Table 10004.5. As business occupancy, the required number of fixtures is similar between the Plumbing Code and the Building Code. But CPC requires more fixtures for female occupants at greater occupancies. So this is a laboratory for educational beyond the 12th grade. And so we used laboratory educational beyond the 12th grade as function of space in Table 4.1 and 10004.5. Laboratory occupant loads for grades 12, greater than 12th grade are defined as non-educational in the California Building Code Table 1004.5, but not in the California Plumbing Code Table. I must have put that wrong, 4-1. And this is open to interpretation and could result in occupant loads being calculated as shown. This results in larger occupant load calculation and a greater number of fixtures in larger labs when using the values for the educational lab in the California Plumbing Code. Mercantile. So there's no difference between the occupant load values in the California Building Code Table 10004.5 and the California Plumbing Code Table 4-1. As a result, the required number of plumbing fixtures calculated per Table 422.1 using Table 1004.5, 10004.5, or CPC Table 4.1. However, for the same number of plumbing occupants, the required number of plumbing fixtures for the establishments over 5,000 square foot is smaller if the IBC Chapter 29 is used in the calculations. And then for the warehouse, using warehouse as a function of space in Table 4.1 and Table 1004.5, the occupant load value for storage warehouse is significantly different between the California Building Code Table 1004.5 and the California Plumbing Code Table 4-1. Table 1004.5 calculations result in a 700% increase in occupant load. However, the required number of plumbing fixtures calculated per Table 422.1 or per Chapter 29 is the same for 5,000 square foot to 100,000 square foot facilities. For facilities of other sizing, using Plumbing Table 4-1 along with Table 422.1 results in smaller number of required plumbing fixtures. So the assumption that the distribution portion occupant load factor of the warehouse is insignificant and not included in calculations, which may not be the case in real life scenario. Did all that make sense?
Thank you, Beth. Yeah, I think kind of like Enrique said before, depending on which occupant load factor table is used, it's going to yield, the different counts. So, we have these posted on our website and we do get a lot of calls and emails, a lot of times from architects and designers that are, they kind of run into some of these scenarios. So, we appreciate any feedback and comments or questions that folks have. Oh, I saw a hand raised there for a minute. Is it Prabha?
Oh, yeah, thanks. Thanks for this presentation, and I'm calling from City of Palo Alto Building Division. So I have a question, because I think we are struggling with existing restaurants. We're trying to calculate the occupant load using the table 1004.5, and all restaurant required to have additional fixtures because it was not calculated the base previously. It used to be occupant load factor 30, we are using the 15. So it's almost double on the occupant load wise. And so that's the struggle we are facing. And because even existing building, when you go to table 422.1, it says if it is a new construction, addition, or occupancy change or any occupancy increase required to review the table 422.1. So if it is existing building, they don't do any of them. They don't need to do that. But when you go down, there's another section, section 422.1.3 with the DSA AC banner. What it says, if it is a public use building, you need to go back to the table 422.1, calculate the plumbing fixtures if you have more than 50% of the alteration of the facility. I don't know exactly facility mean there because I believe it is inside the space. So that trigger to go back to the table 422.1 to calculate occupant load, sorry, plumbing fixtures. Then we have to go back, we are going back to the 1004.5 to calculate the occupant load, and that way there's no enough space to show the compliance. So this is a big challenge in the existing building. I tried to see actually what the guidelines, because if we adapt the table 4.1, is it allowed? Because BSc and DSA, some jurisdiction adapted it. Did it allow us to adapt that table in our code cycle, or where we stand on that? Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhath. That was a lot, so I think I'll try to parse it out. I know you had some questions about existing buildings, and we've heard a lot about that, you know, during the workshop, and we do get a lot of calls about that. You know, whether it's like an addition or an alteration or a change of occupancy or something, you know, that's something that we'll definitely take into consideration, you know, when looking at this table, and we'll likely have to, you know, coordinate with IAPMO, you know, for their help, you know, to see what the intent is there, you know, when it comes to how to apply, you know, building code 1004.5, you know, to existing buildings, not just new construction. And I think you had a question about a DSA access amendment to 422.1.3. I'm not sure if it was specific to that or just an example. You know, that may be something we can, you know, kind of discuss further offline. If you email us or DSA, we can kind of help with that. But your last question is kind of a doozy. You know, we recognize, you know, we kind of said up front that these are BSC and DSA amendments, and the scope of those amendments is limited to those occupancies that we've been talking about. State buildings, state colleges, universities, K through 12, public schools and community colleges. But we do know that local jurisdictions, you know, I think Vicki mentioned, you know, earlier, she, you know, works with many that adopt table 4-1 and apply it, you know, to, you know, more, they expand the scope, you know, to other occupancies. You know, there are rules in building standards law that govern the local amendment process that cities and counties do via ordinance. You know, so as long as that's done properly, you know, I think that's why we see some jurisdictions that allow and use table 4-1, and then we're using table 8 before that. You know, that's kind of where, you know, I think Building Standards Commission stands is, as long as the health and safety code is followed with regard to the rules for ordinances, you know, those can be adopted. So hopefully that helps.
Can I ask that, because I think this is a point when we are thinking about the adoption and people say, you know, adoption, you can't go below the restriction, you know, we have to go above it if something we need to adopt something city wise. So that's the question, because the table 1004.5 is required more restrictive requirement than table 4.1. But my question is, if BSc and the DSA, they are both co-authors and they can adopt it, why city can't adopt that one? You know, because I don't think it's a violation, because it's a two different requirement. Because when you look at the table for 1004.5, it's a egress requirement. That's everything need to happen in the instant time. People has to get out from. That's the different requirement. We calculate the occupant load. They calculate occupant load in the break room, in the office area, but it's the same occupancy in the both sides. So you don't need to adapt all of them. But when you consider egress, yes, you need to consider each room, because we don't know when people are there in the break room or in the office. It's the same number of people. But when you adapt all people, we get a lot of occupant load and we get a lot of plumbing fixture count. So these are the things, you know, I'm just give one example. When you go to 1004 versus plumbing count, health need and the exit need are two different needs. So I don't know whether those factors are considered when you go to 1004.5, because I don't think it's relevant each other to consider that occupant load. And when you go to IAPMO, also in the past, they say go to building code and means of egress to calculate occupant load. And they dropped that language, means of egress part, sometime back. And so I don't know anybody understand what exactly we have to go to building code to calculate occupant load, because chapter 10 is the only place to somebody to calculate occupant load. Because 2001 CBC has appendix 29 at that time. Now it is dropped with the IBC adoption. So these are the confusion on our end when you try to go. And so again, if I summarize my question, so if BSC can adopt the table for one, we can adopt in the same manner legally everything. Is there any question if you're going to adopt that, because we are coming the code adoption. So if you can adopt that, and is there any problem in the city-wise? Because I can advise our building official, because we want to make sure we are do the right thing, right manner. We don't want to go over the law if it is not allowed us to do. Yeah, thanks.
Definitely. Thank you, Prabhat. Do you want to?
Yeah, I will try. There were many questions, so I'll try to.
I'm sorry.
The summary only. We have table 4.1 4-1 and BSC and the DSA, as it was stated several times, adopted this table because we have both agencies have authority to adopt standards for particular occupancies. So now cities and counties, they can modify the code. Some cities and counties are adopting 4.1, sorry, because they believe they meet the requirements in the building standards law and the state housing law that addresses this local adoption. Other jurisdictions, they don't, because they believe that they cannot meet the requirements in the same standard. So we're not attorneys. Each jurisdiction, they have their own legal counsel that can advise them whether or not they comply with this requirements statute for local adoption. So for us, we are a state agency, again, responsible for particular occupancy. So now moving a little further regarding the table. So there are occupancies that there is no state agency with authority to adopt this occupancy. So, for example, I think HCD may be able to make some modifications to the model code based on their authority over housing. And some of these occupancies, for example, business could be an office in housing development, multifamily housing development, for example. But most of these occupancies, for example, commercial, mercantile, even these warehouses, there is not a state agency besides the state fire marshal for fire and life safety that has authority for these occupancies. So I know I'm not clarifying anything, but I'm just trying to say how difficult it is for the state to take care of it, and even for local jurisdictions to do it at their own. This is why we're here, and this is why we're discussing. So the issue is not that much related to the existence of table 4-1 in the plumbing code. It appears that everybody agrees that this table is good to stay. The issue is how we can make it better, so this table or modified table or something else can be applied for occupancies throughout the state, and don't separate state buildings versus everything else. Again, I know I'm not helping much, but I'm just trying to say that it's a difficult task. And because of AB 130, we won't be able to do anything officially for the intervening cycle, but it's good we started early, so we will have enough time to keep working on this table and this particular section of the plumbing code. So your points are very well taken, and we've been discussing this a lot. And we're not attorneys, so I will refer to the attorneys. Again, going back to your initial question about the local jurisdictions, why they cannot adopt this table 4-1.
If I can add to that, Stoyan, just anecdotally, we've gone to functions of, CALBO, the California Building Officials, and different, functions where we engage with the local jurisdictions. And, kind of going back to your question about when BSC and DSA originally brought Table A back into the plumbing code when it was removed from the Uniform Plumbing Code, because that's a very good question. And again, while none of us were here, our understanding of when BSC and DSA did that back in, I think, the 2009 triennial cycle was that the prior California Plumbing Code, the 2007 Plumbing Code, had Table A. So if BSC and DSA preserve Table A as a state amendment for their occupancies, they're preserving the regulatory effect for their occupancies. So there's no change in regulatory effect from the 2007 California Plumbing Code to the 2010 California Plumbing Code. But because we're limited in the scope of our amendments, it would only preserve the regulatory effect for those occupancies, K through 12, community colleges, UC, CSU, and state buildings. For the rest of the occupancy types subject to the model code, table 422.1, and then getting 1004.5 for your occupant load factor, there was that's a more restrictive model code amendment that came with our triennial adoption of that model code. That's kind of when that started. So that's an answer. I'm not sure if that was the rationale used, but we know that that's kind of what has happened. Is it's pretty much we've tried to maintain the regulatory effect for BSC and DSA occupancies. But back to anecdotally, what we've heard from other local jurisdictions is some of them seem to interpret the sections relative to alternate means and methods, the ones that we kind of point to in 1.8.7 and I think 301.3 as an option for the locals to use. In that, footnote 8, from table 422.1, we believe, with our research that that was why all those agencies co-adopted that footnote, was to remind the enforcement entities, because OSHPD co-adopted it too. So this would be OSHPD, saying that they, as the enforcement entity for hospitals, can determine alternate, means and methods for those plumbing fixture designs and calculations. So again, like Stoyan said, we're kind of doing our best to, to kind of address this problem, between, and I think it all comes back to building standards law and state housing law, which requires California to adopt model codes, from 3 different code writing bodies. And they don't always, kind of line up, so that's where, we really value, yours and everyone else on this workshop's feedback and expertise, so that we can, hopefully get to a sound and like a good, fix for this between now and the 2027 cycle. So we really appreciate your feedback, and we encourage you to, shoot us an email or give us a call so we can, kind of talk through this further offline and in the future. So thank you, Prabhat.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll continue, and actually, if you give the email, and we'll definitely email you. Because the point, I think, if I made one quick point, I don't think building officials have a clear understanding whether they have authority to make that call, because of the whole majority building official I spoke, and they think that if the model code is more restrictive, we can't go above it. That's the point they bring it up, and so there's no clear direction from anywhere BSC, like when they do the code adoption, because they clearly say you can't go less than the model code. So this is the confusion. I think that I understand anywhere else it's applicable that way, but when you come to the plumbing code, because we have enough building now done with similar to table 4.1 or appendix 29A earlier, we don't have any complaint. They don't have a restroom enough. But if there's a complaint, that's none of them covered at this point. If you have a bar with a beer and they have to have more restroom, but they don't like that. But there's no complaint saying we don't have enough restroom. So there's no people dying or anything happen because they don't have enough plumbing fixture facilities. So these are the things. So there's no facts to prove that. We need to go to restrictive requirement like a model code, what it says. I think model code dropped the ball, not giving any direction. That's what happened, because they go into the more restrictive for nobody pay connecting dots. That's what I'm seeing, that there's no proper direction. If this particular section, you can go either 4.1 or 10 or 4.5. So if it is clear, that's good enough. A lot of people will change it because they have facing every single tenant improvement come from restaurant. They have to face this one. They are more restrictive, and the people has to enhance the toilet facilities. It's nothing going to happen. That's why. The last question I have one more thing. I'm sorry to take your time. In the DSA AC, the table section 422.1.3, DSA AC only for the accessibility, or this is for just for clarification. When you ask DSA ACC compliance, is it only for the accessibility, or the plumbing count also part of the DSA authority for the commercial building, like a public facility, like a mall, mall situation?
I can take that.
Please.
DSA.
I appreciate the question. What I prefer is that we address that as an access question. We don't have the access team in the house, and so we certainly want to be able to respond completely to your response. So if you could email DSA access, we'll be on the watch for your email, and we'll try to respond to that specifically.
Actually, I reached out to Michelle and about the DSAC, and because she quoted the health division section, my question is, because I am okay with the accessibility part. I don't have any question about the accessibility requirement. But the DSAC, that section trigger calculate a plumbing fixture for the rest of the people in the shopping mall. Because if it is a public facility, it need to recalculate occupant load because of the DSAC section. Otherwise, they don't need to calculate. Because that section trigger a lot of things down the line. Because that trigger to go to again 10.05. That's what I'm saying. I will send an email. I'm happy to do that actually. Thank you.
Yeah, I would appreciate it. As you mentioned, there are a lot of implications to the response, so I just want to make sure that it's an accurate response before giving it to you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you responded with Michelle.
Thank you, Prabha. All right, so I kind of jumped ahead to our contact page, but we just want to thank everyone. If there's any other comments or questions on what we've discussed, again, we're gonna continue to kind of research this with DSA and stakeholders. We're not sure when we'll, regroup on this, again, based on AB 130. We're likely not going to be able to do anything substantive this current 2025 intermeeting cycle, but if anything, it's going to give us more time to, kind of research this and discuss with stakeholders and try to answer a lot of these questions for the upcoming 2027 triennial. And I see John Latour's hand up. Good to see you, John. How you doing? Go ahead.
Great. Hey, thank you for doing this. Really. There's been a lot of confusion, a lot of interest, and I wanted to give you some history that I think will help you. Where all this stuff came from and some of the things that have gone on over time. And I'll preface it with my hope is that we end up with one method, one plumbing code for our country, one plumbing code for California. Unfortunately, we have two now. And as Enrique pointed out, and I think you've shown, that neither what's in the California Building Code, which is the same as what's in the International Plumbing Code, and what's in the California Plumbing Code and what's in the Uniform Plumbing Code, neither one of those are perfect. But if we could take the lead here in California and take the lead and maybe take a look at both of those documents and come up with something that is better, that would be my dream. And so let me go back, Table A. And I'm going to take you way back before 2006. I'm going to take you back to the 1980s. IAPMO and ICBO had an agreement where ICBO would produce the Uniform Mechanical Code in conjunction with IAPMO, and IAPMO would process the code changes for the Uniform Plumbing Code. But ICBO had oversight over the plumbing code. So their members, in essence, had authority to approve what IAPMO had done. The ICBO members were very concerned about the number of plumbing fixtures that the Uniform Plumbing Code required. And their fix was to adopt a table that cut the occupant load in half. When you cut the occupant load in half, you don't necessarily cut the number of fixtures in half, but you significantly reduce them. So that was the origin of what we call Table A, and it was in the building code, Table A, in conjunction with the occupant load factor. So it basically said, hey, for determining plumbing fixtures, use this Table A, don't use the occupant load factor. Well, unfortunately, ICBO and IAPMO separated. Another factor you need to know, I served on IAPMO's national board from 1983 to 1989. And they separated after there was a takeover of the IAPMO board. I was the lone survivor of the original board from 1985 and 1986. And on an 11 to 1 vote, the new board discontinued the arrangement with ICBO. I was obviously the one that voted against it. And so what happened is the 1988 Uniform Mechanical Code and the 1988 Uniform Plumbing Codes were produced by different organizations. And the state legislation at the time said for adopting what the state needed to look at was a model code, Uniform Mechanical Code, as jointly published by ICBO and IAPMO. There was no 1988 jointly published. So in California, there was no California Plumbing Code adopted based on the 1988 editions. Well, the board figured out that was a huge mistake, and they right away worked with ICBO to work back together again. So my term ended in 1989, and I decided not to run for re-election. And unfortunately, after I left the board, the two organizations separated again. So it was not a good fix, reducing the occupant load in half. The real concern at that time was the impact that the UPC had on business occupancies. They felt that it was required way too many fixtures, particularly very small business occupancies. And business occupancies weren't the areas that were where the concern was. As somebody mentioned, potty parity bill came about, and we all know about women standing in line at assembly type occupancies, not business occupancies, but assembly type occupancies. So you may not know that I chaired a 3-person committee in 1994 that produced the International Plumbing Code. And I don't know if any of you have ever heard of HOK architecture. If you haven't heard of them, if you've been to a Major League Baseball stadium, chances are they designed that Major League Baseball stadium. So around 1993, before the 1994 and 1995 publishing of the IPC, HOK designed and built Camden Yards, then Coors Field, and they also did Pac-Bell Park. They've done 14 new Major League Baseball stadiums of the 30. And in addition, they have done additional 4 remodels. They also do theaters, smaller stadiums, and so on. And working for Major League Baseball was very interested in expanding their customers. And they were focused on females. They thought the greatest expansion of attendance in Major League Baseball would be attract females. So HOK actually did studies on existing stadiums and found out that particularly for females, they were undersized. And HOK gave us the benefit of that study. And that's the basis of the of the International Plumbing Code, which is the same as the International Building Code for minimum plumbing fixtures. And what it does is if you use the occupancy table and if you use the International Building Code, Chapter 29, what you're going to find is it's less restrictive than the UPC for businesses, but it greater addresses larger occupancies, particularly for females. And so, Beth, I really appreciate the numbers that you went through. And if you take a look at them again, if you look at business occupancies, the International Building Code generally is less. If you look at larger assembly occupancies, you'll find that particularly for women, I think the International Building Code does a better job of addressing the issue. And there's also some other benefits of all gender restrooms and things like that. The codes are all behind the times, both the IBC and the UPC, behind the times. And then I also want to point out the footnote that was developed. During the Code 2000 partnership, we were looking at, on the plumbing side, should we adopt the International Plumbing Code or the Uniform Plumbing Code? Very clearly, the decision was going to be to adopt the Uniform Plumbing Code. Sheila Lee and I addressed the Code 2000 partnership and got an agreement that for plumbing fixtures, the only other method we know of is what's in the International Plumbing Code, which is the same as the International Building Code. The only other method we know. So how about adding a footnote to the table that says the local jurisdiction as an alternative can use the International Plumbing Code for minimum plumbing fixtures. Code 2000 Partnership Committee agreed to do that. But when it got to the Building Standards Commission, politically, it was obviously not acceptable. So that was modified to go back to the general terms of local jurisdiction can use alternate methods and materials for determining the minimum plumbing fixtures. And that's my response to Prabhath and City of Palo Alto. We didn't even need that footnote because you have that authority to use an alternative method. And, as you mentioned, as time's gone on, that footnote has changed. It was either a 6 or a 7 or an 8, and it's slightly modified. But I really thank you for going through, and I look forward to this group working together to come up with something a lot better than we have. And, if IAPMO and ICC could work together to come up with something, it would be my dream. So thank you.
Thank you so much, John. I appreciate your comments and especially the context, the historical context. That's invaluable. We appreciate it. Thank you. Any other comments or questions on what we've discussed? Again, we thank everyone for their time. We do have our contact information on the slide here if you want to call or email Building Standards Commission. And I apologize, Eric, I didn't get DSA's contact info up here for schools, but we can put you in touch with DSA. We know where they live. We've been crashing their conference room for the last 3 weeks, so we've got each other's number. Again, thank you everyone for your time. I'll give one last opportunity for comments or questions. And just want to thank DSA for their help with this. Enrique? Oh,
Hey, thank you, team. Hi. Yeah, I just want to clarify that the UPC, he mentioned that the UPC doesn't address gender neutral or all gender facilities. It does. And again, the body parity was a very big study and which addresses, gender neutral or women-based equality and time saving for health and safety. The UPC is big on health and safety for that. And also, just to clarify, like California or any other state, it really depends on what they adopt. If, wherever these ballparks were sent, well, most likely they were adopting the other code, not necessarily because they had both or, right? Well, just that, I want to just clarify that, the Uniform Plumbing Code and also California now addresses all gender. And I'll be happy to answer any questions. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Enrique. As always, we appreciate your help and feedback. And yeah, we know that one of the last activities that we did, significant in the plumbing code with DSA was we early adopted IATMO's all gender multi-user restrooms, for state buildings and BSC and DSA occupancies a couple cycles ago, in advance of the Uniform Plumbing Code having that exception to the separate facilities for all occupancies. So yeah, thank you for clarifying that. And as always, thank you for your help and participation. But yeah, thanks again to DSA and Beth for all your hard work on this. Alicia, everybody. If there's no other questions, I think we do have one more agenda item or anything not on the agenda that anyone would like to discuss. Any comments or questions on that? Seeing none. Okay. All right. Well, thanks again, everyone. We really appreciate everyone's time and feedback, and we'll go ahead and adjourn, but we look forward to continuing this dialogue with you soon. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.